The signature happened at 1:17 in the morning. Not noon. Not during a press conference. Not surrounded by cameras. 1:17. And honestly, that single detail is what made people inside Madrid start whispering that something bigger is happening behind palace walls right now. Because emergency decrees are supposed to calm situations down publicly. But when something gets signed in the middle of the night, that tells me the panic probably started before the public even knew there was a problem. And I know some people will say, well, monarchies handle paperwork all the time. Sure, but this didn't feel routine. The timing was too strange. The silence afterward was too controlled. And the reaction online, even stranger. Because instead of giving full explanations immediately, palace communication stayed unusually careful, almost like they were trying to slow the story down before people started connecting dots themselves. That's when I realized this may not actually be about the decree. It may be about what forced it to happen urgently. And once you start looking at it that way, the entire story changes. Because over the last few months, Princess Leonor's role inside the monarchy has quietly expanded faster than most people expected. Not officially, not with giant headlines, but strategically, little by little, appearance by appearance, speech by speech, and now suddenly we're hearing about overnight decisions, emergency coordination, and unusual movement around the palace schedule. I don't think those things are disconnected. I really don't. In fact, I think the monarchy is entering the exact phase they were hoping they could delay until later in the decade. The transition phase, not necessarily of power officially, but psychologically, publicly, emotionally, and honestly, that's harder to manage than legal transitions. Because public emotion can't be controlled like protocol can. Now here's the part that really caught my attention. According to people close to the royal environment, the decree wasn't treated internally like a ceremonial royal task. It was treated like a stabilization move. That word matters. Stabilization. Because institutions only stabilize when they feel something shifting underneath them. And I know this sounds dramatic, but stay with me for a second. What if this isn't about one emergency at all? What if this is the palace preparing for a completely different era of public pressure? Because Spain in 2026 is not Spain 10 years ago. The internet changed everything. Royal families don't operate in slow motion anymore. One image trends globally in minutes. One awkward appearance becomes a TikTok analysis. One facial expression becomes a headline. And honestly, I think King Felipe understands this better than people give him credit for. That's why this late-night signing feels so important to me. Not because of legal details, but because of the message underneath it. Urgency. You don't move at 1:17 in the morning unless something suddenly feels too important to wait. And before I continue, if you're new to Leonor's story, subscribe. I post every day. Because these royal stories are starting to feel less like isolated headlines and more like one giant unfolding documentary happening in real time. Now let's talk about something nobody in mainstream coverage wants to say directly. The palace has been leaning heavily on Leonor's image recently. Very heavily, and that can become dangerous for institutions. Because the more the monarchy depends emotionally on one young figure, the more pressure quietly builds around that person behind the scenes. I noticed this months ago. The military training coverage, the carefully selected appearances, the controlled but increasingly serious public image. Everything feels designed around one idea: preparation. But preparation for what exactly? That's where this story gets fascinating. Because while Prince William and Catherine continue presenting that polished, stable monarchy image in Britain, Spain feels more like a monarchy trying to modernize while balancing uncertainty at the same time. It's almost like watching two completely different strategies. Britain protects tradition first. Spain is trying to protect relevance. Huge difference. And weirdly enough, this reminds me of something Mr. Beast once said about audience attention. He talked about how modern audiences instantly sense when something is overproduced or emotionally fake. And honestly, that's the exact challenge monarchies face now. Younger audiences don't automatically admire royal institutions anymore. They analyze them. They test authenticity. They compare reactions. That's why Leonor connects so strongly right now. She feels less scripted than older royal systems. But here's the hidden cost nobody talks about. The more authentic someone appears publicly, the harder it becomes for institutions to fully control the narrative around them. That's the paradox. And honestly, I think this emergency decree may partially reflect that growing reality. Not because Leonor caused a problem, but because the monarchy is adapting around her growing influence faster than expected. And look, I'm not saying there's some massive palace collapse happening tomorrow. I'm saying something subtler, something more important. The monarchy feels aware that the next few years will define whether younger generations emotionally reconnect with the institution, or emotionally detach from it completely. That's why every move suddenly feels strategic. Even timing. Especially timing. Think about it. Why sign overnight? Why not wait until morning? Why risk creating speculation at all? That's what keeps bothering me. Because institutions obsessed with image usually avoid dramatic optics unless the urgency outweighs the risk. So what outweighed the risk here? That's the question I keep asking myself. And honestly, I think the answer may involve pressure building from multiple directions at once. Public expectations, political tension, media scrutiny, security adaptation, and above all, succession optics. Not official succession, psychological succession. There's a difference. People are already emotionally imagining the future monarchy through Leonor now. That process has started. And once the public emotionally shifts toward the next generation, the institution itself starts changing behavior internally too. Meetings become more urgent, schedules become tighter, communications become more calculated, and yes, emergency decrees start happening at strange hours. Now here's another hot take I've been thinking about lately. I actually think King Felipe is trying to avoid repeating mistakes other monarchies made during transitional eras. Because history shows something very clearly. The most dangerous period for monarchies is not collapse. It's uncertainty. When people start sensing hesitation, confusion, or disconnect between the institution and the public mood, trust erodes quietly. And once emotional trust disappears, ceremonies alone can't fix it. That's why this overnight decision matters symbolically. It projects movement, control, action, even if the public doesn't know every detail. And honestly, that may have been the entire point. To show the palace is still actively steering events rather than reacting passively to them. But there's another side to this too. The faster the monarchy modernizes itself around Leonor's generation, the more internal tension it probably creates behind closed doors. Because traditional institutions hate rapid adaptation. Especially, old royal systems built around patience, hierarchy, and symbolism. Modern internet culture moves faster than monarchy naturally wants to move. That collision creates pressure. And pressure creates emergency decisions. That's why I don't see this story as random at all. I see it as another signal. Another small crack revealing how quickly the monarchy is being forced to evolve publicly. And honestly, viewers feel that instinctively. That's why stories like this explode online. Not because people care deeply about decrees themselves, but because audiences can sense when institutions are entering unstable emotional territory. People become fascinated by transitions. Especially unfinished ones. And right now, the Spanish monarchy feels like a transition happening in real time. You can almost feel the acceleration. Now personally, the moment that convinced me this situation was bigger than the official narrative wasn't even the decree itself. It was the silence afterward. That controlled silence. Because when institutions know a story will disappear quickly, they usually over-explain confidently. But when they're worried the story connects to deeper public anxieties, they become careful, measured, minimal, and that's exactly what happened here. Which tells me the palace probably understands something very important. People are no longer just watching King Felipe. They're watching what every decision means for Leonor's future. That changes the stakes completely. And honestly, I think even the palace underestimated how emotionally invested younger audiences would become in her story. She represents continuity, but also change. That combination is incredibly powerful publicly. And incredibly difficult institutionally, because once someone becomes the emotional symbol of the future, every decision around them starts carrying historical weight. Even emergency decisions signed after midnight. So what have I learned watching this entire situation unfold? Simple. The real royal story is almost never the document itself. It's the timing, the atmosphere, the body language, the silence between statements. And right now, all those signals point toward one uncomfortable reality. The Spanish monarchy may be adapting much faster behind closed doors than the public realizes. And if that's true, then this midnight decree was probably not the beginning of the story. It was the warning sign that the next chapter has already started.